On the evening of July 11, 1902, a grand banquet was held at the Armory on the campus of the University of Minnesota. It was the annual meeting of the National Afro-American Council, attended by historic figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Booker T. Washington, the greatest gathering of African-American leaders ever to occur in Minnesota. The event would also be historic in that it would highlight a growing rift among black leaders on how to best uplift the race in the new century. In the middle of this clash was the man who brought the event in Minnesota, Fredrick McGhee.
McGee was a participant in this great American story, really, of the post-emancipation generation searching for what role black Americans were going to have in the country. And all that drama being played out nationally was being played out here.
Fred McGhee was born a slave in Mississippi in 1861. By 1886, McGhee had risen up from slavery, found education, married, and joined the most prestigious African-American law firm in the city of Chicago. 3 years later, he had been lured from the black Mecca of Chicago to the tiny black community in St. Paul.
The community had reached a critical mass where it might be important to have black professionals come in and provide services. F.L. McGee was one of those that was recruited. He had a law degree, was encouraged to come up here and practice.
And so in June of 1889, Fredrick McGhee became the first African-American lawyer to practice in Minnesota. The man who brought McGee to St. Paul, newspaper editor John Quincy Adams, introduced the attorney in the pages of his paper, The Appeal. But the mainstream press was just as interested in the dynamic young lawyer.
First of all, he was a curiosity. Second, he was a handsome fellow and very articulate, and naturally reporters are drawn to that.
The confident courtroom lawyer took on a series of sensational defenses and won, much to the delight of the black community.
The winning of this case is a triumph for our able attorney. All parties to the case were of the Anglo-Saxon race, which makes the victory of lawyer McGee the more striking.
Fred was notorious. He would scrap with other lawyers. They used to say, not so much that Fred liked to fight as he was unwilling to back down from any attempts to disparage his character or his legal abilities. But Fred was a race man.
Like almost all African Americans in the late 19th century, McGee belonged to the party of Lincoln. In 1892, the Republicans honored Fred McGee by naming him an at-large delegate to its national convention, held that year in Minneapolis. But when European ethnic groups in the party pointed out the number of votes gained by patronizing their community, the Republicans turned their backs on the black leader.
Well, they dropped him, and of course with that, McGee dropped them. And so he left the Republican Party and became Minnesota's leading Democrat.
While it was questioned at the time, McGee's party switch was prophetic.
Republicans have proven themselves beyond redemption. The Democratic Party show me every consideration that I have asked for, more than any other Negro now enjoys at the hands of the Republican Party of this state, or will for many a year to come.
At about the same time, McGee was making another unorthodox decision. He converted to Catholicism.
The Catholic religion teaches and requires one common brotherhood. To the Negro, the Catholic Church means a shelter in the mighty storm.
This perspective was influenced by Archbishop John Ireland, whose progressive stand on African American equality led to the creation of St. Paul's historic black Catholic parish, St. Peter Claver.
Among the incorporators, signing their names on the papers were John Ireland and Fred McGee.
Whether it was party politics or religion, what seemed to be important to McGee was what it meant for his people. The early activist's legal license was his other weapon of choice. McGee filed a number of local civil rights lawsuits. In 1891, before Plessy versus Ferguson, he took on a case with national implications, where he brought suit against separate but equal laws in Tennessee. Unfortunately, he and his allies couldn't afford the long-distance case, but McGee was right. This was the legal approach that would eventually end American segregation, but not for another half-century.
So he was sort of prophet in the wilderness, trying to get done what the NAACP Legal Defense Fund did, gosh, in the 1940s.
While McGee's profile was on the rise nationally, he continued to put down roots locally.
Well, one of the things is what a thorough Minnesotan he became. He participated in the arts, he appeared in plays, he supports charities.
In 1892, he and his wife Mattie adopted a 2-year-old orphan while in New York. McGee himself had lost his parents when he was 13. The leader's interest in this issue made him an active board member for the Crispus Attucks House in St. Paul.
I believe in organizations. Heart and soul, I believe.
McGee's role in early civil rights organizations led to the great gathering that occurred in the Twin Cities in 1902. He managed to make Minnesota the site of that year's annual meeting of the National Afro-American Council. Success for the St. Paul meeting would be the participation of Booker T. Washington, founder of the Tuskegee Institute and a leader who had the ear of U.S. presidents. McGee desperately wanted Washington at the meeting in St. Paul. The statesman obliged the emerging leader from Minnesota and attended. As the business of the convention proceeded, McGee and his allies soon realized one of the reasons for Washington's preeminence. The Bookerites were calculating throughout the conference and maneuvered him into control over the organization.
And so McGee finds himself blindsided, completely politically outmaneuvered, and it's by his idol, Booker T. Washington.
Washington's tactics and his conservative approach to black advancement frustrated another emerging leader, Harvard scholar W.E.B. Du Bois. McGee and Du Bois would become friends and allies and would provide a new direction for the new century.
McGee and Du Bois sensed that this break was coming, the opportunity was there.
His connections with Du Bois led to a discussion in 1905 about an alternate civil rights organization, which later became known as the Niagara Movement.
In the past year, the work of the Negro hater has flourished in the land. Against this, the Niagara Movement eternally protests. We claim for ourselves every single right that belongs to a free-born American.
Later, the Niagara Movement melded into what would become the NAACP.
Co-founding America's most important civil rights organization was one of the many contributions of Fredrick McGhee. For all of his efforts, in 1911, a dinner was held in his honor, where he graciously responded to his community.
When the lips, now speaking, are laid in the grave, that my brothers will gather themselves as you are gathered tonight and say, he lived, tried to be right, tried to help the race, and in trying to be right and trying to help the race, he died.
Unfortunately, McGee again was prophetic. His time was short. A year later, he died of an infection at age 52.
There wasn't enough room at St. Peter Claver for the memorial service. There had to be another one. It was a great outpouring of eloquence, the likes of which probably rarely seen. I think of Hubert Humphrey's memorial service as a similar sort of civic event. People recognized to a certain degree that a man the likes of which would not be seen again had been lost.
But as a memorial and testimony to his professional work, the St. Paul branch of the NAACP was organized in 1913.
When Minnesotans recruited Fredrick McGhee to St. Paul, they were just looking for a lawyer. What they got was a leader who was ahead of his time. Among the next generation of black attorneys that carried on McGee's mission was Minneapolis activist Brown Smith. In his eulogy to McGee, Smith seemed to capture the lasting promise of the late attorney.
He was a race man in all that the term implies. I know of nothing that would inspire a little Negro boy more than to hold up before his face a picture of Fred McGhee.